Good morning, Westgate. We are living in interesting times. This is uncharted territory for all of us. I'm here with Larry, and we're with an empty auditorium right now. So this is surreal for us too, but I want to say how thankful I am for you tuning in and watching this sermon. And I pray you're being blessed by these sermons, the Gospel of John. I'm having fun putting these together. I love the Gospel of John. I just love the fact, even though life has thrown us a curveball, we're continuing with this study. And I want to just tell you for a second, if you'll pause the video and read John chapter 10, verses 1 through 18 together. That is our reading for today. Once again, John 10, 1 through 18. Pause the video and read that before we start with the sermon. Well, I also want to tell you that part of the link on this sermon, you'll find discussion questions for the sermon that will kind of replace class time for us. So after the sermon, as a group, as a family, if you want to go through those questions, that would be wonderful. And also, I provided some communion guidelines, some devotional thoughts and prayer thoughts for your communion time as a family. But I'm once again thankful you're tuned in and we're doing this study together through the Gospel of John. There was a preacher once that was talking to some young children about the 23rd Psalm. And so he's making this point, and he's really hamming it up that sheep are helpless and they need a leader, they need a shepherd. And so he just goes on and on about how helpless sheep are. And he says, they really need a shepherd. So he asked the children, he says, who is your shepherd? And he kind of holds his hands up for dramatic effect, and he's waiting for the answer. And one kid answers back and answers correctly. He says, well, Jesus is our good shepherd. And he says, well, then who am I? And one kid wisely says, you must be the sheepdog. So many times we as ministers, I guess we're kind of like the sheepdog because Jesus is the good shepherd. In John's gospel, we have 7 I am statements. And my favorite is this one. I am the good shepherd. And the reason I love this I am statement is it's personal. It tells us a lot about the gospel. It tells us a lot about who Jesus is. I am the good shepherd. And today, as we think about this image of the good shepherd, it's interesting to consider that as you look at artwork throughout Christian history and how Christians have related the image of Jesus and the things that they found most powerful in their lives, the one image that they went back to over and over again from the year 30 AD to 400 AD or 500 AD is the image of the Good Shepherd. As you see mosaics and sculpture and pictures and in catacombs and other places, you see this image of the Good Shepherd over and over again. I want to share with you a slide for a minute, a picture of some powerful artwork from the ancient world. This comes from the ancient church. And you'll notice that one picture that we see in the slide is a tombstone for a young girl. The young girl is Apollia Chrysopolis. And Apollia had died when she was 7 years old. And her parents loved her very much. And that's what it says there in the Greek there in that passage, that her parents loved her very much. And you'll notice at the top right is a picture of a shepherd carrying a sheep, that here's a family that's struggling. They're struggling with the loss of this child. And the one thing that comforts them the most is the image of the Good Shepherd. You notice the other picture is a mosaic from Ravenna, Italy. And in that mosaic, this is going into a church building, probably around the 4th century that this was created. It's a beautiful image. You see the symmetry in the middle. You've got Jesus there, the Good Shepherd. And you've got right in the very center of this picture is his staff. And you'll notice the staff is the picture of a cross. The cross stands at the center of this idea of Jesus being the Good Shepherd. So today I want to talk about this idea of Jesus being our Good Shepherd. And what does that mean for us? And my goal is once we get done with this, you'll have a greater appreciation of this I am statement, which is one of my favorites. So let's look at 4 things specifically about Jesus being the Good Shepherd. And the first is Jesus as the Good Shepherd means I am helpless. I am helpless. Think of all the animals Jesus could have used in his teaching. You know, he could have said, I'm the great lion tamer, making us lions. Maybe he could have said, I'm the great horse whisperer, making us horses, majestic, beautiful animals. Some of us around might think, well, I would like to be an elephant or a tiger in particular here in our home state. But Jesus picks a sheep. He picks a little lamb and says, I'm the shepherd and you're like sheep. And really that's not a compliment to us. When Jesus calls us sheep, he's really pointing out the helpless nature that we have, how pitiful we really are all on our own, that we get lost and we don't know the way forward. There's a story related in Ankara, Turkey, in a newspaper, and it's a true story. And it's a little bit comical in a way, but it's actually tragic in a lot of ways, where shepherds are napping on the job. They're not paying attention to what the sheep are doing. And I just want to relate to you the story from the paper because it's just hard to believe. Supposedly a true story. It says this: hundreds of sheep followed their leader off a cliff in eastern Turkey, plunging to their deaths this week, while shepherds looked in on dismay. 400 sheep fell 15 meters or 50 feet to their deaths in a ravine in the Van province near Iran, but broke the fall of another 1,100 animals who survived. Shepherds from a nearby village neglected the flock while eating breakfast, leaving the sheep to roam free. The loss to local farmers was estimated at $74,000. What a humongous loss. They just stopped paying attention. But the point here is these sheep are so aimless. They are so directionless. They are so lost that one sheep goes off the ravine, off the precipice, and over 1,000 more follow that one lone sheep off the edge. This tragic fall. And so when Jesus says that we're like sheep and he is a shepherd, it's not a compliment. You want to go, well, thanks, Jesus, for that statement. But you may think, well, man, I'm not like that. You may push back on that and say, I'm not aimless. I know the way forward. I have advanced degrees. I've been educated. Or we may look at our pocketbook and say, man, my bank account says, I've got some clout. Or I could look at my social schedule and it may say, well, man, I have some clout. I've got it going on. When we really realize, or we really think about it, we'll realize that we're lost in so many ways. Just consider your own development throughout the years and how you look at yourself from prior years. I mean, think when you were 12 years old, you probably believed you had it all going on. You had it all figured out. I mean, you meet some 12-year-olds and, man, they've got some hubris. They think they are the cat's meow in so many ways. But think when you're 16 years old, thinking back to your 12-year-old days. You probably want to burn those junior high pictures. You want to erase the history that you were ever 12 years old. And you probably thought as a 16-year-old, I can't believe when I was 12 I was that goofy, I was that silly. Think when you're 20, thinking back to when you were 16. Or 30, thinking back when you were 20. Or 40, thinking back when you were 30. You probably look back to your younger years and go, I cannot believe I believed those things. I can't believe I was so misguided and so silly and so goofy. And so by our own standards, we realize that we fall short, that we have to grow, that we are helpless in so many ways, and we need to develop and grow as human beings. I mean, imagine if God allowed you to live to be 100 years old, you would learn a lot more. But if he allowed you to live to 200 years old, you would look back at your 100-year-old self and go, there was so much I had to learn. Now compare yourself to an infinite creator. Compare yourself to God, who is eternal. He's lived forever. He knows everything. This is the God that created the brain, in which we think of how complex brain surgery is. He created the brain itself. God created string theory and quantum mechanics and all the wonder and power of this universe. I mean, how smart is God when you think about it compared to us and our little finite selves? And we realize that we're helpless and hopeless in so many ways. That really we have this danger of not accepting that we don't know. I always said when I taught school and I coached sports, there are people that you meet, parents in particular, not to crack on parents, but parents that just don't know. They don't know about your sport. They don't know how things go. They don't know how practices run. And they realize they don't know, and they're willing to learn and listen to coaches and take guidance. Then there are parents that don't know they don't know, and those are the ones you worry about. We need to understand that we are helpless. We need to know that we just don't know sometimes, and we need a way forward. We're lost. We're vulnerable. And when you think of sheep, sheep are not animals. Like think of a sheep that gets out into the wild. You don't have wild sheep. Now, so many times you have domesticated animals. They can go into the wild and you get a pack of wild dogs. I remember hunting with my dad. He would talk about wild pigs, and I was terrified. I never saw, wild pigs in the wild, but I remember hunting with my dad, and we'd see ground that had been rutted up, and Dad would say, well, there's some wild pigs have been here. So I was terrified of that idea of wild pigs. And I don't think if you're out in the wilderness and you're out hunting, you hear the bleating of sheep and your heart starts to race. I mean, it's not like sheep become these wild animals you have to look out for. Matter of fact, they are helpless. So as we think about this picture of sheep. In our position before God, we have no reason to be prideful people. We have no reason to have hubris, but we should humble ourselves. So this image is telling us we're helpless. But the second thing that this idea of the Good Shepherd tells us is that we need guidance. We, of course, are helpless, and then we need guidance because we're helpless. We need a guide. And I will tell you, there is something guiding you right now. There's something that is leading you, whether it's a thing or a person or some type of philosophy of thought, but there's something that is shepherding your heart at this moment. Now, you may think and say, well, I don't believe that. I don't believe I need something to shepherd me. I think I can lead myself. Let me demonstrate to you how fragile we really are and why we need a shepherd. You know, if you walked into your workplace tomorrow and you walked in and a group of people surrounded you and started telling you how horrible you were at your job, that would affect you just a little bit. You could act like you're impervious to that kind of stuff, but that would affect you. If people come to you and tell you you're no good or somehow maybe your looks are not good enough, that you just don't add up, you're not adequate, that bothers us. We're driven by this external voice. We need affirmation from somebody. We need a good shepherd that comes along and tells us who we are and what our mission is. We are vulnerable to that. I mean, just think about how we are with social media, how we are driven by likes on Facebook or Twitter, or when people retweet your tweet, or when people like your post and they share your post, or they say nice things to you on social media. That really stokes our ego a little bit. We're so driven by this external voice that says certain things to us. So we are fragile, and we will fall prey to the wrong kinds of shepherds if we're not careful. Let's go back to our reading, John 10, 7 through 8, and verse 10. Jesus again said to them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. The thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy." So he's talking to the Pharisees. If you look at the context of this passage and you go back to the end of chapter 9, we realize this is an interaction with the Pharisees when he tells this story. And he's telling the Pharisees, listen, guys, you're charlatans. You pose to be the rulers. You pose to be shepherds of the people. But just like the shepherds of Israel in the Old Testament that had failed God's people, they were failing God's people miserably. And he's telling them, hey, you guys are tying up heavy burdens on these people, and you're destroying people. You're not leading them. You're not shepherding them. You're destroying them. You're doing the opposite. And we see from Scripture there's only one good shepherd, and that's Jesus Christ. There's only one shepherd that will lay his life down for his sheep, and that is Jesus. The third thing I want you to see is this. Jesus being the good shepherd means that I am known. I am known by God, and this is so powerful to understand that God knows who we are. You know, you may be thinking, if people really know who I am, if they know everything about me, if they knew what was in my mind and in my heart, they would reject me. They would have nothing to do with me if they knew my deepest and darkest secrets. I don't care how well you communicate with your wife or your husband. There are things about you they don't know. I don't care how close you are to your mom or your dad, your brother and your sister, or friends that you have in your life, but there are things they just don't know about you. There's only one person that truly knows you, that knows all your secrets, knows what you think in your heart. In your moments when you're all by yourself and you're there with your thoughts, there's only one who really knows who you are. And we see that in our reading in John 10, 14 through 15. Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. Jesus says there's this intimate knowledge he has of us. It's like the knowledge that the Father has for the Son, and the Son has in the Father, that he truly knows us, and we know him, and he lays his life down for us anyway. Now, just wrap your mind around that for just a second. Understand the ramifications of what Jesus is saying to us today. He knows you truly. He knows all those things about you that you don't want anyone else to know. Now listen to this next part, and this will just give you encouragement, I hope. This is John 10, 11 through 13. Once again, he repeats, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. Who is a hired hand and not a shepherd? who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees. And the wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. You see, the hired hand is just a day laborer. He's just there for the day, working for a wage. And when the wolves show up, he runs for the hills. But the good shepherd lays his life down for his sheep. Now here's what's amazing. God knows what's in your heart. Jesus knows what's in your heart, but he's still willing to die for you anyway. It also shows us the great value that we have to Jesus. When we think of the shepherd and the sheep in the ancient world, sheep in the ancient world, they were worth a lot. Think about the wool that came from the sheep. Think about the sheepskin that was used in the ancient world. Think about that sheep were used as sacrificial animals, how ram horns were very valuable to people. An ancient, just one lamb was very important, was worth so much in the ancient world. And we were worth so much to Jesus if you think about what he did for us. The Son of God, who had existed for all eternity, gave up his celestial abode, became a human being, came to this world and went through hell for us because he loved us. That's amazing. And we're told that we have these wolves that are against us. And I would say as you read John's gospel, there are two wolves in particular that stack out against us. There are two wolves that are against us as Christians today. The first wolf is sin, and the second wolf is death. And we've already learned in this sermon series that sin, when we sin, we become enslaved to sin. We get shackled in sin, and it drives us deeper into our own passions and desires. And it eventually warps us into something that's unimaginable, that we never thought we could become. But also we have this death problem, that none of us get off this planet alive. And Jesus comes to solve both of those for us. The Good Shepherd comes and lays down his life to defeat the power of sin, but also liberate us from the bondage of death. And that is good news indeed. So we see the gospel portrayed beautifully in this image of the Good Shepherd. We know that we're helpless. We have nothing about us that makes us special. But then we're valued infinitely by God. And boy, that's the core of the gospel, that we are helpless, but God still loves us anyway. And the fourth thing I want you to see about the Good Shepherd, it means that I am called. I'm called. Now, this word called is so misused in religious circles today. It's become nonsense to a lot of people. People talk about being called to all kinds of stuff. But I want us to be specific about the calling that Jesus is talking about here. What does it mean to be called by Jesus? I want to take you back to our reading. This is John 10, verses 3 through 5. Jesus says this, "To him the gatekeeper opens. The sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. A stranger they will not follow, but they will flee from him, and they do not know the voice of strangers." Now, this is a really beautiful scene when you realize what Jesus is talking about. In the ancient world, shepherds would bring their sheep at night to a sheepfold, and they would put multiple flocks of sheep in one fold. And so the shepherds would have one place maybe they could rest, and one would watch for a while, and they could catch up on sleep as one person watched over the sheep. And then the next morning they would wake up and they would call their sheep forth from the sheep pen. So you had multiple flocks of sheep, and you would have all these different shepherds, and each shepherd would step out into the countryside and they would call to their sheep, and the sheep would come only to their shepherd. They heard the voice of their shepherd. So in one aspect, if we are following Jesus Christ, we're listening to his voice. But the other part of this is we are told that he names his sheep. Now, in the ancient world, in the first century and in the Old Testament, to name someone meant you gave them purpose. Remember the Tower of Babel story. They build this tower. They're trying to reach heaven because they want to make a name for themselves. The Hebrew word there is Shem. They want to make a Shem for themselves. And God is the one that gives us our Shem, gives us our name, gives us our identity. They want to do it themselves. They want to grasp what is not theirs. God is the one who gives us our identity. He's the one who names us and gives us purpose. And I love this fact that there's individuality, that we are called to this kingdom. We're called to this church. We're called to this body of people. But in tow, we bring our individual talents and who we are. You know, we're not like the Borg on Star Trek, where we're called to assimilate to this collective. We bring these individual talents. God knows us by name. And we have this potentiality that Jesus sees in us. I can't help but think of Simon Peter. You know, Simon, the son of Jonah, was this guy that was anything but a rock. Matter of fact, he was like jelly in so many ways. He was like Jell-O. And Jesus calls him rock. And we see throughout the Gospels, and we see later on in the book of Acts, he finally grows up into that name, Simon the Rock, Simon Peter. So God calls us by name, but he calls us with this potentiality of who we are. And it's amazing that our identity and our purpose comes from the Good Shepherd. But at the same time, we're drowning him out. We're not hearing his voice. I'm afraid this is true for all of us, a lot of us at least, that we're so busy. We've got so much going on with our schedule, whether it's dance recital, whether it's ball games, where it's homework, where it's getting dinner, where it's going and picking up groceries. I mean, you can get exhausted just going through this list of things that we have to do all the time. And throw on top of that Netflix binge watching and all kinds of other activities that we do. And after a while, I have to ask the question, do we even hear God's voice anymore? Do we hear the voice of the Good Shepherd? Or has it been drowned out by all the monotony of stuff that goes on a daily basis that really doesn't matter? We have a Good Shepherd that calls to us, a Good Shepherd that gives us purpose, a Good Shepherd that gives us identity. And I would say, are we listening to him? And another part of this is, if everything is true that I've said, that we are helpless, that we need guidance, that Jesus is the Good Shepherd that knows everything about us but still lays his life down for us, should we not give him ultimate allegiance? Because here's one thing I hear people say more and more. They'll say, well, I accept this parts of the teachings of Jesus, but these things that I find embarrassing, that are not congruent with 21st century values and sensibilities, I'm just going to write that off. You know, maybe Jesus was confused about that, or there's parts of the writings of Paul, maybe they're not really inspired. Maybe they shouldn't be in the Bible. And we kind of pick and choose the parts of the teachings of Christ in the New Testament that makes us more comfortable. And you see how crazy that is, how ludicrous that is, when we realize how helpless we are. Who are we to sit in judgment over the Good Shepherd? So I would say we should totally submit ourselves to the teachings of the Good Shepherd and hear his voice only over all the other voices in the world. I want you to think about this thought as we close out our time together. Jesus Christ, who is the Lion of the tribe of Judah, becomes a lamb. He becomes a lamb so that we can become children of God. We who are the helpless sheep, Jesus becomes like a sheep before its shears and never opens his mouth, and puts himself in our place so we can be elevated to be children of God. So today, as you think about this with your family, as you contemplate these thoughts that we've had together today, just remember who you are. What the Good Shepherd has said about you, that you are his. That he found you, you were lost, and you're also loved. And that he laid down his life for you so that you can be a child of God. God bless you, and I hope your time together in this study goes well today.